It's true, Atlanta is blowing up and one of the most desirable mega cities to move to. But with that growth comes a cost of living increase. What if I told you an hour northeast, you could have a very similar life experience and save thousands of dollars each year in cost of living? Gainesville, Georgia is the spot, and we're going to break down that cost of living and see why it might be the better option for you. How's it going? My name is Winston Gibbs with the Living in Northeast Georgia channel. And I'm here to tell you everything there is to know about the recreation, the lifestyle, the entertainment, and the real estate of what it's like living in the best places and hidden gems of Northeast Georgia, from the metro Atlanta suburbs to Athens to Hartwell and everything in between, including Gainesville, Georgia. Gainesville has been titled, and they're well known for that small town feel and big city amenities. And with that small town feel, do you really get the cost of living savings that you might think you would get? Let's dive into the numbers and see if you could really save thousands and thousands of dollars by living just an hour northeast of Atlanta. Let's start with the big elephant in the room and talk about housing prices. Because I've just recently done a series on Alpharetta and Lawrenceville where you can go check out those prices. And then I did one on Gainesville. And the numbers are similar, but there is a difference. Just based on stats, in Atlanta metro area, you're going to see an average house price that is probably close to about $500,000. Now, there can be a huge range. When I was in Alpharetta, it was talking about the average sale price was over $800,000. Lawrenceville was pushing $600,000. Gainesville, when I went through the numbers, the average house was selling at about $700,000. But keep in mind that there's a huge influence on that based on Lake Lanier and those prices that get bumped up. If you're moving and you're not looking for lake property, your average sale price is going to come down closer to $400,000 when you really look into it. That's going to get you probably a pretty good standard 3-bed, 2-bath house around 2,000 square feet. And depending on the age of it, how renovated it is, if it's in a newer subdivision, and those different things are going to affect the pricing. So you can have $50,000, $100,000 price swings, but in general, compared to the Atlanta area, you're going to look at about a 20 to 25% savings on the price of the same exact house or something very similar. When we talk about rental numbers, it really depends on what you need. Doing some research, if you're looking on a lower end or a smaller end, that is maybe 1,200 to 1,500 square feet, you're probably going to pay about $1,500 to $1,700. If you're wanting to bump that up a little bit to like a newer suburban style home, 1,500 square feet to 2,000 square feet, that's maybe 10 to 20 years old, you're probably going to be in that $1,900 to $2,300 range. And then if you need something new or bigger or near the lake or downtown, you're probably going to be at that $2,300 all the way up to $3,000 and more. Obviously, the bigger it gets, the newer it is, the more amenities it has, that number can continue to rise. Some of the things that may affect that are the quality of the lot. Does it have a basement? Are there more bedrooms? Again, finishes are going to be a huge part of that. Now, for a similar comparison to the Atlanta area, when you get one of those older homes, maybe renovated, just your classic 70s, 80s ranch, opposed to the $1,500 to $1,700, you're looking at about $1,800 to $2,100, $2,200. You step up to that newer suburban home that's 10, 20 years old, nice neighborhood, you're probably in that $2,300 to $2,700, $2,800 range, depending on a lot of those different factors. And when you want something newer, upscale, bigger, better location, that's probably going to run you minimum $2,800 to $3,500 plus. And again, the larger the house, the better the location, the better the school system is really going to bump those numbers up. You're looking at about a 20 to 25% less rate for your rental, which is going to be very similar. Same thing that you're talking about if you're going to buy a house. Just there are huge savings in the housing world and what your needs are. And like I've said multiple times when I'm working with buyers, you have wants and you have needs. And especially if you're going to buy or if you're going to rent, let's make sure we check off the needs and then we can start slowly adding the wants depending on what your budget is. Because we want to make fiscally responsible decisions as buyers or renters. Moving on from actually where you're going to live, whether or not you buy or rent, part of that decision making is what are my utilities going to look like? Let's say you have all the standard utilities like electricity, maybe you have natural gas, water and sewer, trash pickup, internet, cable, streaming, those different things. You are going to see consistently that the cost of living in Gainesville is less than the cost of living in the Atlanta area or metro Atlanta area. If you look at your standard probably 2,000 square foot house, obviously give or take a little bit percentage wise, you're going to have higher power bills in the summertime because we have been on a crazy heat streak the last 2 weeks here. So you're really going to be pumping it out. In the wintertime, we do have some cold months where you may have to run it up. I know personally from like March until May, my power bill is so low. I mean, I'm like, did I even run the power? Because it's so pleasant. But in those higher months, in Gainesville, you can expect, based on some of the utility and regional numbers, that you're gonna have a power bill somewhere between $100 to $180, maybe $200 a month when you start pushing it up. That's your average, obviously can fluctuate. In the Atlanta area, you're probably looking more like $135, $140 up to $200, $225 a month for something very similar. Gainesville does have a little bit better options because local EMSs and cooperatives in the areas are going to help save some costs there against maybe some of the bigger city providers. So that's with your electricity. You're going to have a savings right there. If you do need gas to power, maybe your furnace, or maybe you got a gas stove or a gas range, gas water heater, some of those things, it's going to peak in the winter months, obviously, because you're running. So your power bill may be less if you have natural gas, but your average cost for natural gas, based on numbers, is saying in Gainesville, you're looking at about $40 to $90 a month, whereas in Atlanta area, you're looking at about $50 to $100, $110. So not a huge difference there, but it is a little bit. That's another $100 on the year that you save, which could pick up one of your dinners later on. We look at water and sewer. In the Atlanta area, you're always going to be paying for water and sewer. You're probably averaging about $45 to $70 a month on that, whereas Gainesville, you're at like $35 to $60. Now, one of the things being Gainesville, if you're in one of the more rural areas, which you go look at one of the other videos, you can see that there are rural areas in Gainesville, you may have wells. I've never seen a well in the metro Atlanta or the suburbs visiting friends or showing houses. If you got a well, you don't have that water bill. I mean, you just got to make sure your well is up to date and it's clean and not getting the harmful potential chemicals and different sulfides in there, which I grew up on a well and I'm perfectly fine. I don't think I'm too weird. It's not like there's weird radioactive chemicals and there's not an aura coming off of me from that. So there's a little bit of savings there. Could be as much as if you have a well, you save a lot. If you are on the water and sewer plans, you're going to have small savings there. Then trash and garbage pickup. I know my dad made me take the trash to the dump every month, but when I became an adult, I was like, I am paying for trash and garbage pickup. Gainesville area, you're averaging about 15 to 25. In the Atlanta area, you're probably more like 20 to 30. And again, it doesn't sound like a lot, but you add $10 here, $5 there, $20 there, it slowly starts adding up. Internet prices, depending on who your local provider is, whether it's Spectrum, AT&T, or Windstream in some of the areas. Now, Atlanta may have some stronger gigabyte options at higher price points, but your internet pricing in Gainesville is going to be about $70 to $100, whereas Atlanta, you're probably going to push that $80 to $120 a month there. And then obviously regular old TV is not a thing. Cable and streaming is going to be very similar because that is just a national provider there. But if you get a local package, you can get a better deal, more options. But I know we all need our Netflixes and Hulus and Disney Pluses and Paramounts. And depending on what game you want to watch, especially if you're a Braves fan, you're going to have to go get those special subscriptions. So I'd probably call this cable and streaming a wash. In general, when you start adding that up, depending on your low end in Gainesville, you're looking at about $280 a month, up to about $450 a month in your utility bills. Whereas in the metro Atlanta area, you're probably going to be on the low end at $300, $330 a month, all the way up to $500 and $600 a month, just depending on what your needs are, your location, size of house, all those things. Some of the things that may come into mind is if it's an older home, you may have a higher electricity bill due to inefficiencies in insulation. If it's an all-electric home and no gas bill, those things. If you're in an HOA, sometimes your trash and water, especially maybe if you go the townhome or condo route, could be included in what your monthly rent is or the HOA fee. And then obviously lake homes are going to have different fees and different utilities that you got there if you got different pumps and filters and all those different things. So again, it's all relative, but in general, you're going to look at about a 10 to 15% savings in utilities in the Gainesville area versus the Atlanta area. The next, what I would think in when I'm going through my monthly budget and where I'm at, the big one is groceries and eating out. Obviously, there's a lot of variables here. Depending on, do you eat out more? Are you feeding a family of 5? Is it just you and a spouse? There are a lot of different factors that go into this. But when you look at national indexes for every $100 spent, then Atlanta is just slightly above the average. So $100 at the grocery store, you're probably going to be spending, compared nationally, about $100 to $105. Whereas Gainesville is going to be slightly below the national index at $95 to $97 in your average grocery basket. Those 2025 estimates, like I said, for every $100, Atlanta's about $105 to $110, so 5 to 10% above national averages, and Gainesville is about 3 to 5% below the national averages. Again, all this adds up to about 10 to 15% savings, where the bulk of that is going to be in your housing, depending on what you got there. Now, one other thing, going to housing, which I probably should have touched on just a second ago, but you got your different property taxes if you are a homeowner. And so your property tax rate in Atlanta, Fulton, DeKalb County, Gwinnett counties, those are going to be averaging about 1.1%, whereas in Gainesville, Hall County, you're averaging about 0.9%. It doesn't sound like a lot, but over year after year after year, it is going to make a huge difference. Now, your sales taxes, when you go to the grocery store or when you go to get your entertainment, in the Atlanta metro area, you're at about 9% on average, whereas in Gainesville, you're about 7 to 8%. So that can be 1 to 2% savings per year. Again, for every $100,000 you spend, that's $1,000 to $2,000 you're saving. And then one big thing is the state income tax is going to be the same across the board. We're at about 5.75% in income taxes right now in the state. I know they've been working on lowering those things so that you can hopefully have a more affordable lifestyle and make Georgia an attractive place to move, because it has been one of the top states to do business in and to move to for about the last 5 to 10 years, without a doubt. And I can see it. I've been doing this for about 9 years, and I can see the growth in the big city and the small towns like where I'm from, Hartwell, and where I live in Athens. So what are you doing for work? Because that's a big one. You live in Gainesville. Are you commuting to Atlanta? Do you have a local job? Are you working for home? All these things, depending on your gas prices, commute times, are going to have an impact on what that general cost of living is. As of today, the gas in the Atlanta metro area was about $3.20 to $3.40 per gallon, whereas in Gainesville, it's about $3.10 to $3.30. Obviously, you go to Sam's or Costco, which are readily available in both. You're going to have those prices drop a little bit, but that is per gallon, at least 10 cents or more if you're living in the Gainesville area, just on gas. I drive a lot. My gas bill is pretty high, and I go to Sam's or Costco every time I get a chance. Now, in the Atlanta area, if you are not working from home, you're going to probably have an average commute time of 30 to 60 minutes, depending on what part of town you're in, which is really important in deciding where you're going to live. Whereas if you work locally in the Gainesville area, you're probably going to have commute times that range from 10 to 20 minutes. Now, there might be a lot of idle sitting if you get caught in rush hours, which is going to burn gas, not the same as highway miles, clearly, but if you are commuting into the Atlanta area, or maybe commuting to Athens for something, you're probably going to have commute times of 50 to 75 minutes. And so that will increase that gas bill. So that is a very work-centered decision on, hey, where am I going to live? Maybe you want to live in Gainesville, but your job takes you there, or you drive into Atlanta a couple of times a week. It's all very relative depending on your personal situation, but that can have an impact. And in general, it's going to be cheaper. Now, the other thing is Atlanta does offer MARTA. They have the train systems and the bus systems, where Gainesville is very, very limited on that. And you really do need a car to get around the Gainesville area to go do all the other things like grocery shopping, going out to eat, or, just general life. But gas is going to be cheaper for sure. So talking about cars and talking about driving, that's a big cost for a lot of people. I know I don't drive a brand new vehicle, and you have to do your regular maintenance. And just a really quick look at that is you're going to save about $10 to $30 in pretty much everything you're doing, whether it's your oil changes, your tire rotation and balances, your brake pad replacements, battery replacements, alignments. If you look at some numbers that put it out there, your annual basic maintenance in Gainesville is probably going to be somewhere between that $600 to $900 a year for your vehicle, where if you're in the Atlanta metro area, you're at about $750 to probably $1,100 a month difference on those things. One of the things that contribute to that is your labor rates are going to be a little bit lower in the Gainesville area, probably $75 to $95 an hour in a lot of those shops versus the $100 to $140 an hour in the Atlanta area. Some of those reasons are that you're going to have higher rents and higher overhead in the Atlanta area versus Gainesville. And then Gainesville is going to have a lot of independent shops with better pricing, while Atlanta is going to have more dealerships or chains that they have to meet certain quotas and values and those things. So that's definitely going to be an impact on your day-to-day life, on what your car maintenance is. And you, your spouse, you got multiple kids, you need to add that up and take that into consideration depending on if Gainesville is going to be a place for you. Now I'm going to touch back into the food, and we start getting to the lifestyle and recreation part of your day-to-day living in Gainesville area versus the metro Atlanta area. Like I said, the theme is going to be consistent with Atlanta being slightly higher than the national average and Gainesville going to be slightly lower than the national average. If you're going out for lunch at maybe your mid-tier restaurant, like your Chili's or TJ Fridays or something like that, you're probably looking at $15 to $20 a head. Whereas like a nicer dinner entree at a standard restaurant is probably going to be that $18 to $30 range. Whereas in Gainesville, you're probably looking at $10 to $15 for lunch, which is a huge difference. And your dinner entrees are probably going to be about $15 to $25. So again, a 10 to 15% savings. If you look at a very practical breakdown of that, you would say one of our favorite, at least one of my favorite lunch spots is going to be like your Chipotle, your bar burritos, Willie's, one of those Tex-Mex burrito bowls. If you look at Atlanta versus Gainesville, your burrito bowls, you know, it's not a large savings, but if you go there a lot, you're probably about $1 to $1.50 difference on those bowls. Then your add-ons like guacamole or queso, you're going to be saving about 50 cents to $1 on those. Now, say you don't want to go to a bowl, you want to go sit down and have dinner with your family. And again, I'm just going to stick on the train of Mexican food. I just had it twice. I love Mexican food. I could eat tacos and queso all the time. Regular old combo plate with maybe like enchiladas, rice, and beans. Gainesville is going to cost you anywhere from $10 to $14, where in the Atlanta area, you're looking at $13 to $20. Fajitas, probably $14 to $18, whereas in the Atlanta area, $18 to $24. Tacos, so you get 3 of them, $10 to $13. Atlanta, $12 to $15. Margaritas, because who doesn't enjoy a good cold margarita? Regular old house margarita, Gainesville's probably like $5 to $7. In the Atlanta area, you're probably looking more like $8 to $12. And then for a good cold beer, I know domestic beer versus imports, technically if you're wanting good, you know, Corona or something, Gainesville's going to be $3 to $5. Atlanta's going to be like $4 to $7 for your beers. And so those are small savings. Typically, you're about 15 to 25% cheaper than the Atlanta area. Atlanta has a lot more of the upscale concepts like places like Superica, Pure, Taqueria, some of those where your entrees, like I said, could be 20, 30 bucks. Date night's going to cost you probably 70, 80 bucks at one of those. Or Gainesville has a lot of local places to eat, like your La Parias, Los Tres Amigos, some of those other affordable Tex-Mex places. And so it's funny, my brother who lives in the Dunwoody, Sandy Springs area, Metro Atlanta, I grew up in Hartwell. We go to see our family there, and he'll pick up the dinner for 5 or 6 of us and be like, man, what I paid here is what I paid for just a date night in Atlanta for 2 people. So, and again, Hartwell, that is a much more small and rural area, but there is a big difference in those. That's a very practical breakdown of maybe your lunch and your dinner costs at something that most people love. Now, when you start getting into like your fitness, your recreation, your activities, the lifestyle things, which is all the stuff we just talked about, was probably your bottom line. How do I survive? What do I get by? The stuff you have to have, your fixed expenses per se. Now we get into those other expenses where you have a little bit of income left over. What am I going to do? How am I going to entertain myself? Well, fitness is big for me. You look at your upscale gyms in the Atlanta area, memberships, you're going to be somewhere in that $100 to $200 a month, where then you have your like Crunches, Planet Fitnesses, which are still going to be $30 to $60 a month. And then in the Gainesville area, for those, you know, Crunches, Planet Fitness, Anytime Fitness, you're still in that $30 to $60 a month. But if you want a specialty studio like yogas or CrossFit, the cost is definitely going to be a little bit cheaper. You're probably in that $80 to $150 a month, where you're not really going to see $200 a month for some of those. Another one of the things that I love, as you can see behind me, is golf is huge. And so there's some really good golf courses all throughout Northeast Georgia, but Gainesville has some great options. Your premium golf clubs are probably going to be, or some of the other ones, maybe not quite as upscale. You're looking at probably $250 to $400 a month. If you get one of the really nice ones, maybe $500 a month, depending on what program you're in. Whereas a lot of the clubs in the Atlanta area are going to start at the $500 a month and push up to $1,000 a month. And again, we can give you links. If you got questions about some of the best golf in the area, I'd be more than happy. Comment below. You know, we can get that information to you. But golf, a big part of my life. Lots of great communities to go play and practice, whether private or public. But if that's something that's important to you, like it is to me, it's definitely important to know what your cost is of something of your entertainment. Now, one of the other things that Atlanta has to offer, and I think it's a huge benefit of the Gainesville area, is Atlanta does have a lot more entertainment with the concerts that come to the metro Atlanta area. The pro sports tickets, the comedy, art, all those different things are going to be something that Atlanta, because of the nature of it and the scale of it with some of your major performers or major sports teams, those are going to be higher. But Gainesville does have some of those events that come. They have different venues to do that, and you're going to see a lower cost to do that. But one of the pros about being the Gainesville area is, with it only being about a 40 to 70 minute commute time, depending on where you're at and when traffic hits, is you can still enjoy those things. And if you want to go to the Atlanta area to enjoy those different events and venues, it's not hard to get over there. You just need to do some planning to do it. I wouldn't say on your Tuesday night, you're gonna be like, hey, let's go watch a Braves game and drive an hour and 20 minutes over there. Whereas if you live in the metro Atlanta area, you could go catch a Braves game. So it just takes a little bit more planning, but you can still get the enjoyment of those different events or concerts. Whereas in the Gainesville area, you can go check out the minor league teams in like the Gwinnett area. You can go watch the Falcons practice. There's great high school sports throughout the area too, which is always fun. You can see the next level of player coming through, or the next performer with your local theaters and some of those things. So again, in general, the cost is going to be less in Gainesville to go for some of those entertainment type things, but you always have access to the metro area for that. Now, last thing I probably want to touch on is your nightlife. If that you're still in that phase, or like I said, this is part of maybe date nights or getting a night away from the kids or whatnot, is the Atlanta nightlife. You're gonna have a lot larger varieties of places to go grab a drink or go grab dinner, but a lot of places are gonna have cover charges. You may have to valet, and your drinks are gonna be probably $5 to $8 more per beverage, depending on what you get. Where Gainesville has a lot of casual local bars, breweries. I mean, there's tons of breweries in the Atlanta area, but you're gonna have those things where your cost is going to be less. You're probably not going to see covers. You're going to be able to find your own parking, or you can be responsible and get an Uber or Lyft. Both of them are going to have those options, but it will be cheaper to get Ubers in the Gainesville area versus Atlanta. I know from experience. So I've talked about all this with like the cost of living in Gainesville versus Atlanta, and you're looking at, like I said, probably about 10 to 15, 20% cheaper in the Gainesville area. Now, how does that compare to like a real true small town like Hartwell or Livonia, or maybe some of the suburb areas of Athens? Well, those towns are probably going to be another 10 to 15% cheaper than what Gainesville is. And that's why Gainesville is such a great blend of small town with big amenity. So you definitely get some savings versus the metro area. It's not as cheap as some of the rural small towns in Northeast Georgia, which are beautiful towns, and I'd highly recommend going to because they have their own special charm. But you do get a lot of those amenities that we've talked about in other videos with the hospital systems that are there. You have a lot more restaurant options. You do have nightlife options. It may not be to the extent of what the Atlanta area is, but it definitely is a great spot to be in. So if you think I missed something and you want to know kind of what the cost of living is in Gainesville versus Atlanta, or maybe even one of those small towns, don't forget, you can always leave a comment. You can schedule a consultation. Make sure you follow my channel, Living in Northeast Georgia. I'm Winston Gibbs. I'm here to tell you everything there is to know about the recreation, the lifestyle, the entertainment, and the real estate in Northeast Georgia, one of the most beautiful places in the entire country. Hit the button to subscribe, click the bell for notifications so you can get all the updates on the next videos coming through about beautiful Northeast Georgia and why towns like Gainesville are a great, great place to relocate to or move to.